Feeling the Hues. Written by Fernth. Read by Arashi. He almost thought this abnormal ability was gone for good. The moment she entered his field of vision, he heard nothing, smelled nothing, felt nothing. The sensations were missing. When she spoke, no color appeared around his eyes. Nothing. Any sound that came out of her didn't tug at any of his senses at all, and he didn't like it. He fought hard to keep it at bay. Everything was normal around her, and he'd be lying if that didn't stir up his growing interest in her even further. While he wasn't overly fond of his condition, not when what he got out of it was always a gamble between pleasant and painful, it was certainly economical for the most part. So it wouldn't be a surprise that the idea of being unable to read and size somebody up at the blink of an eye bothered him so much. For the first time in ages, he needed to exert some effort to know someone better. During their introductions, his synesthesia did all the work for them, who he'd decide to get along with and otherwise. But this came with a price. If he dealt with more than two people at the same time, was when his ability becomes nothing but a warped cacophony of each of his senses. Synesthesia specifically made Shin repulsive to heavy crowds, but it's not like he wasn't already socially inept in the first place. Shin lightly rubbed his temples in an attempt to ease it, and as subtle as he wanted it to appear, foreign faces watched him in suspicion. All this overwhelming pressure pushed his face deeper into his red scarf. Was it his silence, or the impression that he's not to be trusted? The last one seemed to be the case. He didn't need to look at them twice to confirm it. Oh, that stung a bit. He was spared when a feminine voice started, its owner clad in a teal blazer that made her orange locks gleam in the dimly lit room. He didn't know if she had noticed, but he visibly struggled to read her. Shin just couldn't swallow the fact that there wasn't just anything, something that happened to clog his senses. She was a blank canvas. He looked like an idiot as he tried squinting, focusing his ears and pinching his nose just to double-check if it's really not his fault he wasn't getting anything out of this girl. No dice. It wasn't the headache either. Was she even human? He was yet to get answers, but she had a name at least. Sarah Chidoin. Shin was curious, but he couldn't bring himself to approach her. He wasn't the type to initiate, if his timid nature didn't tell enough. Caution pumped in his veins, as they were in a death game after all. His stomach felt like it was in a knot. He was just as terrified of dying as anyone else, but he couldn't bring himself to show them. He felt all alone, so it was really a silver lining in between when the company of Kana Kizuchi graced him. Kana was his safe haven, her soothing cadence that smelled of lemons and oranges, chuckles that splattered a pleasing combination of sky blue and vivid purple hues into his vision. Meeting her emerald eyes always played out a lullaby into his ears, to which he swears that if he didn't break eye contact at the right moment, he'd fall into a deep sleep. He couldn't say the same for Sarah. The woman stood in a plane of neutrality. Sarah might as well have been the embodiment of the concept itself, a mediator. Throughout the first main game, they were on sour terms. He hated her guts that never gave him any light on the real intention hidden behind her actions. But that lingering want to know more about the mystery that was Sarah Chidoin only grew worse. His faint prayer seemed to be heard when he managed to hack into the system of whatever place that was. Of course happiness surged through him. He had finally achieved something useful in his 20-plus years of existence. And, more importantly, the chances of Sarah viewing him in a different light, not as a foe who meant to harm, but as an ally to be reckoned with. But why did that matter to him, though? Why would it matter that he was the cause of that smile? All that became washed off by utter disbelief when their hands slapped against each other on that fleeting moment of victory. Shin could have sworn he saw a literal spark of blue and yellow hues. It was beautiful. Could it be that the way of understanding her better was through some form of physical touch alone? There surely had to be a deeper explanation than that. For now, he'd take what he can get. Although he admits it was a time where he felt the strong need for the full extent of his gift, only when it had been partially used that he began sulking how he'd been taking it for granted. She confirmed his suspicions about his condition later on, and solved another one in her wake. Sarah wasn't as enigmatic as he first assumed her to be when Sarah chose to condemn Kana. The little girl smiled so bitterly as she died with thorns pricking out from within her, tearing apart what little remained of his humanity. His last glimmer of hope lifeless before his gaze that grew distant by the minute. Everything left a bad taste in his mouth, his breathing just as constricted as those frail limbs wrapped beneath those lines. Red was all he could see. His trembling hands almost reached to strangle the life out of Sarah. End her. But he couldn't. All because of his synesthesia. Sarah got to him first, a clammy hand landing on his shoulder in an attempt to console him, expression just as disoriented as he was. It's all a ruse, that emotion she was showing him, and he convinces himself that even after she was finally showing what she truly felt, and his brain favored her. Instantly, slow violin strokes playing, threatening to drown his anger with tears that could have come out of him if he didn't swat her hand away in time. Try to repel the thought as he might, they were in sync for a millisecond, genuinely sad for the loss of an innocent life. Shin wonders if this had occurred during the first main game, would this weigh even heavier? After all, Sarah lost him because of Shin. She should have been mad at him too. Why didn't she take revenge on him? What's wrong with her? What's wrong with him? He lost her because of Sarah, but his foolish decision of seeking more about Sarah never faltered in his head. He should harbor nothing but hatred for her after that. Yet he didn't. Shin only continued to intimidate her with his words, taunting and bit at her spirit, make her go after him, because he was too weak to settle with a healthy exchange of thoughts. He knew to himself that he was only being obnoxious to get her to interact with him more. Shin never had it in him to inflict pain upon others, but if it would be the best way for him to be enlightened about some things about Sarah, then he'd seize it. He already had the upper hand, but with his gift after all. Shin would push her to the edge of breaking if it meant getting results. He came up with messing with the AI, which would shatter her morale, or strengthen her resolve. It was a matter of chance on his part. He did it in such an unforgivable way, because not every positive endeavor reaped a desirable result. Sometimes it was the other way around. It was a rotten but proven principle that made him want to throw up. Kana was gone. Lives were taken from them so that they could continue to live a day more. He shivers at the sadness taking over him. If it didn't come out as too demanding of him, Shin thinks if someday his synesthesia wouldn't have to undergo these experiences again, given that he does survive this hellish game of deception they were in.